Bryan Callen show here with Geoff Woo, venture capitalist, founder of Ketone IQ.
Yeah.
Would you say? Is that fair?
Yes.
And so I want to talk to you about this drink because I want to talk to you about a lot of stuff, but I want to talk to you about your background because apparently Ketone IQ was something that was created by DARPA. Is that true? Or
Well, DARPA is a funding agency.
right?
They
give loans to people. Explain what it is for people.
So DARPA is the research arm of the U.S. military. So they funded the internet, which is originally called ARPANET. A lot of the speculative moonshot ideas to enhance military or human performance oftentimes comes out of DARPA.
Like Kevlar, like Velcro, like GPS, all those things, yeah?
All that sort of stuff. Yeah, I think GPS actually was funded by DARPA in terms of positioning and fixing. Yeah. So think of it as like the skunk works of American military industrial complex.
Yeah.
And one of the arms that was very interesting was, can you create super soldiers? Can you enhance human endurance? And that kicked off a program called Operation Metabolic Dominance, metabolism, the way humans process, consume, store, and utilize energy. How do we enhance that? Mm-hmm. And that kicked off a number of research threads, of which became the anchor program that kicked off and turned to eventually what's called Ketone IQ.
Right. That's so that's why people in the Tour de France. See, I always look at who actually drinks it.
Yes.
For me, it's like it works when you have athletes that are actually doing this, and especially Tour de France people who like every little detail makes all the difference. Like they sleep on the ground for recovery. They do everything. So if they're drinking this, that's where I'm like, I'm listening. Because I talked to Chiara about this and I was like, wait a minute, that's badass. That's a huge endorsement.
Yeah.
Right? Because that means it works because they measure every detail. So it definitely has to work. Otherwise, they wouldn't be drinking it, right?
Yeah. No, I think it's, I mean, my background is a Stanford computer scientist. So
really?
So I came at this angle from a very biohacker engineering approach to humans. So obviously have great collaborators, team members who are PhDs in physiology, genetics, et cetera. But I came at it from a very measurement perspective. Can we take blood glucose? Can we measure blood ketones? Actually measure the biometrics that impact performance? So I think it's been one of the most fun kind of strange turns in my career, where coming from a computer science Silicon Valley background into working to what you alluded to, half the Tour de France teams, a number of MMA, UFC fighters that are fan favorites, and I think the best part of the job was working with our special operations committee, working with really the tip of the spear.
Like all the SEALs and Delta Force and all those guys.
All those things.
All those guys, all those units we can't really
badasses,
talk about.
Yeah.
And they take it, and they're.
I think what we can publicly say is that we actually earned a $6 million contract with Special Operations Command. And dude, I mean, it's honestly like one of the coolest experiences, like visiting and talking to these guys.
Bro, this is... How do I take this off? Dylan, help me. This is wild. I'm gonna just talk while I drink this. I need to wet my whistle anyway.
Yeah.
Anything like that. So guys from Tour de France and maybe the special operations community.
Yeah. Look,
I'm not drinking it out of this. That annoys me. I'm not drinking it out of this. I'm drinking it out of the bottle.
Look, that's what I do too. I just shoot it straight from the bottle.
My wife's already into this. My wife's already addicted to this, just so you know.
It feels great. I think we started off talking about it very, very scientifically. I mean, there's deep, cutting edge metabolism, ketosis, physiology around this. But I think the tagline that we've recently come up with is just fuel fantastic. I think it's simple to say, hey, it is healthier, clean energy.
Right.
It crosses the blood-brain barrier and it just feels good.
That's crazy. It crosses the brain-blood barrier.
I'm going to shoot it out.
Come on, man.
Yeah.
Come on. I like it. I like that. Yeah, it's wild.
It tastes kind of crazy.
Yeah, it does. It tastes. Yeah, that's
gnarly.
the one thing I noticed the other day. I was like, well, okay. It's not for the faint of heart. It's strong. It's a little bit like liver's really good for you, but it's not going to be what you look forward to all the time.
Yeah. But the good thing about this versus Liver King injecting himself is that this is WADA compliant. our customers have used this at the elite levels of competition, Olympics, et cetera.
But so how do you measure the efficacy of something like this? I mean, I would imagine you'd probably do a couple things. One is you would probably measure somebody's endurance and strength, one day, and then you'd have them on ketone IQ and see what that does to their performance. Yep. And you'd do an aggregate of that, right? You'd have a bunch of those tests. Yep. So that'd be the first thing. And then you would measure what kind of endurance they had. I don't know if it's mainly an endurance thing, right? It's mainly an energy thing, right?
Yeah, primarily the key endpoint, which is like the scientific thing for like a functional target, is doing randomized controlled trials where you have placebo or a control versus ketone IQ as an intervention. And then, yes, measuring performance. So a lot of the early results was focused on long distance aerobic endurance. But some of the more recent research that we're partnering with academics, there's a trial that we're publishing in peer review, hopefully this year, with University of North Georgia, very active in the military research community around more short burst sprint workouts.
Really?
And I think one of the interesting things that are a little bit further out being used in the performance world is appetite control, weight cutting. So a lot of the Olympic weightlifting teams, as well as combat athletes, they have to very much tune their weight and their power to weight ratio. So something like ketones is very useful because it suppresses appetite but retains lean muscle tissue.
So how much do you recommend people take, like in a shot? Like a whole bottle?
A full bottle will get you zipping.
Yeah.
Our
that's
standard
why you have
dose.
That's why you have this
We
measurement.
measure it out. Yeah. So 30 milliliters is our standard serving. It gets you 10 grams of ketones.
Right.
Maybe we should just rewind back and what are even ketones?
I was going to say, explain what ketones are.
I mean, have you heard of the ketogenic diet?
Yes.
So
let me my layman's definition of a ketogenic diet and what you want to do with ketosis.
Yeah.
Usually you're running on glucose, right? So the food that you eat breaks down as glucose, and that's essentially a fancy way of saying sugar, right? But then when you run out of glucose, ideally you want to run on free fatty acids. So the cells convert the fat stores into what's called free fatty acids, and that's what you're running on. I don't know if those are triglycerides, but either way,
yeah.
I'm not a doctor by any stretch, but you want to be, if you're running on fat storage, you run for a longer period of time, you're burning fat that you have, and that's the fuel that you use. And ideally, people want to get into the state where they're always burning fat.
Yep. And
is that right?
Yeah, no, it's correct. So triglycerides is actually a glycerol backbone with 3 free fatty acids.
Okay.
So triglycerides, free fatty acids are essentially components of triglycerides. So exactly.
Right.
So the interesting thing about just running on pure fat is that free fatty acids are big molecules. And I mentioned blood-brain barrier. Free fatty acids are too big of molecules to cross into the brain.
Oh, they are?
Glucose is a very small molecule.
Right.
So that's why there's a lot of common saying, hey, you need like a handful of M&Ms of sugar to power your brain.
Right.
So what happens if you run out of sugar, you have a ton of fat? Does your brain just starve? Well, the answer is no, because our bodies and many mammals have evolved what's called ketosis, which is a process in which free fatty acids convert into ketones through a process called ketogenesis. So your liver takes fat, converts into ketones. Ketones are very small, efficient energy sources. So instead of using glucose as the primary substrate for the brain, this is the ATP cycle, this is a Krebs cycle, like biology in high school, right? Like there's like the mitochondria. You need something to feed in to create ATP. Instead of starting with glucose or fat, you can start with ketones.
You can start with that. You can ingest ketones like that. And that becomes,
that's a novelty of something like ketone IQ.
Right.
So usually you have to be fasting or eating a keto diet, which is restricting carbohydrate.
Right.
So no sugar, it forces your body to say, hey, we're out of sugar, we got to convert fat into ketones. So the shortcut is, can you create bioidentical synthetic ketones that you can drink directly to put you into ketosis very, very rapidly? So the whole thing with DARPA is, hey, in the 50s and 60s, they were actually taking sperm cells and dumping free fatty acids, sugar, and then ketones to see what was most energetically optimal.
Yeah.
And
what do they swim the fastest in?
Ketones were just like
really?
Yeah, they were the most energetic.
Wow.
So that seeded a lot of research on, hey, how do we produce ketones as a food substrate? Can you create ketones as a food? Long story is that yes, you could, but it was super expensive. So in the DARPA program, one serving of what's now in Ketone IQ would have cost $2,500 to $25,000 a dose.
What?
Yeah.
Damn.
Because you had to basically purify petroleum crude oil, which is an organic molecule, purify it and do a bunch of chemical reactions to turn it into something that you can consume safely.
So I'm taking in a derivative of petroleum.
Not this.
Right.
So in 20 years ago, you would have had to. But the rise of synthetic biology, so our process is that we actually have genetically engineered E. coli ferment sugar into the ketone precursor.
Damn, dude.
So it's
this
essentially
is a scientific thing. It's wild.
Yeah. So essentially, the technology was well understood, but too expensive to scale. Mm-hmm. And where we came into the picture was that we looked at the technology out of DARPA. It was sitting in the backwaters of lab benches. It was too expensive. We applied modern synthetic biology, scaled the production, and now.
How did you do that? That was your idea?
I would say that we played a role in I think with all of science, we're standing on top of the shoulders of giants, right? There's just plenty of Dr. Veach from NIH with the original bioenergetics, just calculating all the ATP efficiency to rise of synthetic biology, right? Like people have been spending careers genetically re-editing these bugs
like
into
CRISPR-Cas9, and they even have a cell that's synthetic, I think now. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Like to think.
Yeah.
So you are coming out of the same school that Sam Altman came out of. I don't know if you know that. ChatGPT.
Yeah. Stanford. I mean, I think he actually
he dropped out of it.
He dropped out.
Yeah. And you went to Stanford and you were a computer science major.
Yes.
Okay. So the first thing I want to ask you is, obviously this ketone IQ thing it's pretty exciting, right?
Yeah.
You know, and it clearly has measurable results. What I like about guys like you is that, you know, you guys are always sticklers for measurable results. I mean, you've got these test groups that have to have results. Yeah. They have to. And my guess is if you got that kind of a contract, it's working because they tend to do their own research, right? What other supplements do you believe in? I'm talking about you because you've done the research. There's a lot of stuff out there. There's a lot of bro science out there. There's a lot of money in supplements, right? I say no to it all the time, you know, just so people know. Like I just got offered some kind of a sponsorship for this supplement company, and I was like, I have to know it works. Yeah. I can't just, you know, I'm not doing it. You know?
Yeah, I think some of the basics are the most consistent and have the largest bodies of data. So I think something that's well understood and very, very safe, something like creatine.
Yeah, I was going to say. I've heard
I think that data is very, very consistent, low side effect profile. That's something that I incorporate. If, you know, I think my biggest weakness is caffeine.
Yeah, I love
overly caffeinated.
Me too.
I mean, the data, I mean, it works, but I think the downside, and I think with the special operations committee, some of the folks that really altered my opinion around caffeine is that you basically, you know, how caffeine works is it blocks adenosine, which is a neurotransmitter that triggers tiredness. But if you constantly have caffeine, you essentially upregulate your sensitivity to being tired.
Yeah.
So that kind of just primed my way of saying, hey, like I like caffeine. It's like it's a phenomenal drug. I think if it was a novel compound, it would probably be banned because it actually feels really good. And if you cut off caffeine, get back on it, it hits really hard.
Yes. Yes. And by the way, that's what when I do it, I like the taste. I like the morning ritual. Yeah. But the truth is, I live for that 5 seconds of euphoria that I still get sometimes if I do it enough. And it's usually a disappointment. I'm like, nothing hit. I'm a drug addict. You know, it's like,
I think we all are drug addicts.
I always tell the story. I took 20 milligrams or 10 milligrams of Adderall. I've never been a drug guy.
Yeah.
You know, I did this joke about like, when I did cocaine once, I was like, I came up with I was like, let's open a store where we sell pancakes and presents. You know, I had these terrible ideas because you're just so euphoric about everything. And Adderall was I was like, this is coke. This is blow. I'm not doing this shit. It lasted 4 hours. I was like on the plane, like, you know. So I'm always wary of anything artificial like that. I was like, that's the end of that. I'm not doing that shit anymore.
I think it's very strange that just because the pharmaceutical industry says, hey, this is like, it's labeled Adderall. I mean, it's an amphetamine salt. It is literally
exactly
a more purified version of street speed.
Yeah. Right.
And it's like, I don't know, like,
and
you need to be feeding kids that.
They do give kids that.
Yeah.
They do give kids that, you know. I have family members that were literally prescribed it when they were 6. I mean, think about this shit. This is what we're dealing with. So, you know, I do think we're going to see a whole new class of drugs. Yeah. We're already seeing this with mushrooms. Like people are taking these different mushrooms, like chaga mushrooms and all the different kinds of cordyceps mushrooms and these combinations. There's this company called Magic Mind that's really good at that. Yeah. These little shots, and I'm telling you, there's that sort of idea between being alert and being jittery, right? Wouldn't you say? I mean, that's the idea.
Yeah. So, and I'm also excited about like the pathway to psilocybin, some of the more psychedelic mushrooms, and I think it's even from purely just the scientific side in terms of depression, smoking cessation, the data is very good compared to SSRIs and pharmaceuticals. So I think it's very, very promising, and I think the world and our culture is moving towards that, which I think is exciting. But in terms of just like my baseline supplementation, I think caffeine, I like to pair caffeine with L-theanine. So that's a amino acid oftentimes found in green teas that mellows out caffeine. So when I take caffeine through a coffee or an energy drink, I like having L-theanine on top.
How do you do it? You take it in a pill form or?
Pills, powder, just mix it in.
Okay.
But yeah, my staples are ketone IQ, caffeine, L-theanine. I like magnesium, especially at night. A lot of us are chronically underdosed in magnesium. Oftentimes we'll have like a little microdose of melatonin to help just put me down to sleep.
Wow.
So I like to keep it pretty simple in terms of like baseline things I stick to consistently, but very experimental. I mean, I think I got into all of this biohacking stuff by just I'll essentially try anything once.
Yeah.
So just experiment on the N=1 personal data side, but I like to cross-reference that with big, large data sets, and then you have a personal assessment on risk, reward.
Yeah. Well, you're gonna think I'm kidding, but you do get a good feeling after you take that. Like you can already feel it. Do you feel it?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's what I like.
This
about
is a commercial. This is a commercial. This is a long. This is one of those long infomercials for ketone IQ, but it works. It's good.
I mean, I think that's like the cool thing about ketone IQ, which is that the data exists, but I think it also feels like something is happening. And I think that's relatively rare. When you have creatine, I mean, the data is like, hey, supplement for 6 weeks and you get some increase in
cognitive function,
overall volume load. And it's like hard to tell over a 6-week period of like taking 5-10 grams a day. I think the cool thing with ketone IQ, you can do a blood measure, right? If we actually measure our blood ketones right now, since when we had the drink 10 minutes ago, you will actually see your metabolism change.
Dude, I'm shredded. You should see what my body looks like right now under the sweater. I came in with a regular body, and now it's stupid. You got to make sound effects.
You look like
my
Thor
body.
now.
Yeah, dude.
Good.
Under this, that's why I wear a baggy sweater. But so now I want to get into. So you studied computer science. My guess is everything you studied in computer science at Stanford is now completely obsolete. I mean, shit's moving so quickly, right?
Yes and no. Yes and
okay.
no. So I would say that information theory, complexity theory, a lot of the core algorithms behind behind ChatGPT is all very consistent, right? These are all like for a lot of these algorithms for ChatGPT, it's statistical methods.
You guys saw this coming?
I mean, I don't know if I saw this coming per se, but it's just cool to see you have much more compute, much more storage. I would say very naive stats can produce really, really great outputs. So I actually remember doing this in undergrad for a lot of these natural language processing and n-grams, which is now like like ChatGPT was like basically like a super advanced version of like homework problems I would do in like grad level natural language processing. So, I mean, if you just go back to like how this stuff even works, I remember writing a program looking at all of the New York Times articles since like the 1900s. And you can basically say, for example, you have a sentence that starts with I am. And you can say, I am a dog, I am a cat, I am Geoff, I am Bryan, right? Through all the New York Times corpus. And then you can assign probabilities. Like I've seen I am Geoff 2 times, I see I am Bryan 7 times, I see I am a dog 5 times. And that's essentially like, hey, 10% time you select Geoff, 20% of the time you select Bryan, etc.
Right.
And you just basically run a random number generator to create output.
Right.
So that's a very naive way to generate language. But if you have something like ChatGPT, which stores up to like 2,000 sentence long tokens with much more, with like all of the internet, you can produce really smart sounding content. But it's based on the same premise of statistical analysis of your training data. So in some sense, it's like, it's awesome that the output of ChatGPT looks like it's sentient, but it's based on the same mathematical premise of training data and statistical probabilities.
So do you think, what are the ripple effects of ChatGPT? What is ChatGPT 0.15 take us, and what does that look like? Can you surmise?
I think manual rote jobs, even for white collar creative workers, are going to be obsolete.
Like, what do you mean? Like, give me an example.
I think maybe my lawyer friends are going to be pissed off, but I think most legal contracts are rote, right? You're not inventing some like new construct of like, hey, a business deal or investment deal or I don't know, whatever, you know, like a sponsorship deal, right? Like those are pretty standard. I'm sure you've done millions of these. All this is kind of the same.
100%.
So I think a lot of the rote white collar jobs that are creative are going to be automated away. So I think that just given how you understand that you need training data to create these outputs, I think where there is hope for humanity is, can you make leaps that are not statistically in the past and connect? And I think that's where like comedy and humor comes from, which is that you can connect things that are not statistically likely in the same vector or like the same conversation thread, tie them together in a very unique, clever way.
Yeah, you're surprising the audience. Yeah,
Right.
I've never really been able to define it, but I think what I'm trying to do when I'm writing is I'm trying to surprise myself.
Yeah.
Like sometimes I come up with a different way of thinking of something. Like the other day I was saying money doesn't buy you happiness, but it definitely buys you a different kind of sad. Like if something happens to you, you know, the idea.
Yeah.
And it's true. Like that you hear about those things and, you know, somehow you can surprise yourself because you're like, I never thought of it that way, but it's a revelation to you. And then it's going to be a revelation to the audience.
Yeah. So that's essentially like you bring novelty and connecting ideas that hasn't been statistically shown in your training data.
Oh, wow.
Right?
Yeah. So how does that work? So my brain is doing that, right? So
I think that's the creative part. So I think
that's original self-expression. When you hear a song you haven't heard before, different notes, or you hear like words, like when Bob Dylan like wrote a song back in the day, you were like, damn, man. It's like, I've never heard that combination of words.
Correct.
It's like Blood Meridian. You read that book by Cormac McCarthy. It's one of the great feats of language, or Lolita by Nabokov. You're like, how the fuck do you do this with the English language? Like, I've never heard it put together that way.
Yeah.
Right? So maybe that's what it is.
So I think that's where we don't understand how human brains work.
Yeah.
Right. So like, you know, like for example, if like for ChatGPT, it doesn't like understand semantically that there's like a noun and a verb and there's like different ideas. It's just like statistical methods that, hey, we oftentimes see if you have, it starts with I, then you 99% of the time see like an am, and then you see like a variance of things that you've seen before.
So ChatGPT right now is working on statistical variance and probability. It's not working on...
There's no deep understanding of like the concepts.
Yeah, so it's not sentient. Like for me, like just take a human being, I can only speak to my creative process, but you know, that's not what I'm doing. I'm not doing statistics or probabilities. Right. I'm kind of keying into what I feel deeply about, what I'm afraid of, what I have anxiety about, what bothers me, what I think is an injustice. Yeah. I usually work from an injustice. Like I hate that there are bad ideas gaining traction in this world. And so I find it fuels me to kind of try to write the record. I'm like, all I can do is shout into the wind, but at least I have a small platform to shout into the wind with, right?
Well, yeah, there seems to be deeper semantic or just like structural understanding of knowledge in human brains. But I would say the devil's advocate part of me that's to argue for the statistical guys is that, well, maybe it's just our neocortex, like the most advanced part of our brain, just telling ourselves stories. Maybe we are just statistical machines.
Yeah.
And we're just saying, hey, I'm just like post facto rationalizing a story.
That's such a bummer. When you say that, it's a bummer, right? Because you might be right.
Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion whether we are just automatons with great narratives.
God damn it, Geoff. Or we're divinely inspired. You know?
I think it's an open question. Right? I think that is...
Yeah, like I had dinner with Peter Thiel, and I realized that I was dumb. And I realized that everything I say at a dinner party is shit I've read somewhere else and put together just so I can look smart. I mean, that's what I do. Let's be honest. Like I talk way too much, first of all. And and Peter was coming up with these completely original ideas I'd never thought about. And I was like, this is why I should shut the fuck up and let him talk, because I don't have anything new to say. I'm just parroting. I spent a lot of effort trying to educate myself, but that doesn't mean anything. That's just information that's ultimately probably going to be and is replaced by things like Google and ChatGPT on their higher levels, right?
Well, I would say that Peter's probably just getting inspired by his information sources. So I think, it sounds like we have a lot of mutual overlapping friends, but I know that he spends a lot of effort, a lot of time flying in esoteric people and just having conversations.
Right.
So I would say that the luxury of having his level of resources, that you can find pockets of info.
Yeah, Eric, do you know Eric Weinstein? He's a good buddy.
Yeah, I know of him.
Yeah, so Eric's a buddy, and he's the same way. It's like, I'll have dinner with him, and I'm like, what the fuck are they? I don't know. He's talking to me about, like, the theory of everything and shit. I'm like, it's
yeah,
crazy.
But I think he's just been studying math for a long time.
Yeah.
And has like very like just esoteric knowledges of abstract algebra, or like I've looked at some of his work in terms of I think it's like tying in areas that we're just like not exposed to. But I'm sure if you really pull in esoteric areas of information from your specific area, you'd probably be mind-blowing them as well, right? Like they don't understand.
Well, they definitely, Eric's definitely a fan of my comedy. He's like, well, how do you, so there is a mystery there, right?
Yeah.
It's a language that I think few people can, most of life is that, right? It's like I watch somebody who's amazing at jiu-jitsu, like Gordon Ryan, and I've done enough jiu-jitsu where I understand how to, there are patterns and things like that. But when I look at him, he's in a room that's fully lit. I'm in a room with a flashlight and I'm getting little pieces sometimes, but it's still a magic trick, right?
Yeah.
And that's what's interesting.
Yeah. So I think if you just bring it back to computer science terms, I think it's just like the amount of recall you can have. So like, what is the library of information that you can instantly recall? And then how much compute, like how quick can you process and recombine everything in your recall? So I think that someone like Peter or Eric, they probably have exposed themselves to a very, very large corpus of data that most, quote unquote, normal people don't have access to. And they're probably just very high IQ, right? They can recall and like reconfigure quite quickly.
Fast computer.
So then I think like one thing that I've been thinking a lot about is if it's, just like if we treat our brains like a computer, you got to be really thoughtful about the inputs in. If we all see the same dog shit, we're going to all produce the same output. That's crap. So I've been very thoughtful about, okay, how do I incorporate new information that other people aren't seeing so it can randomize and create more novel ideas?
Yeah.
So
it's very interesting you say that, because I've spoken to probably 700 academics in my lifetime with my podcast, my old podcasts. And I'm talking about like the leaders of thought in evolutionary biology or whatever. What's fascinating is they all have engaged in the same input, right? They know Freud, they know Darwin, they know evolution. So they all have the same framework, and then they add things to it. They add these. It's like they're doctors. They have the general understanding of how the human body works. Then they specialize in, like, say, the throat or whatever it might be. Yeah. But it doesn't mean they know more about life, and it certainly doesn't mean that you're going to get closer to the overall truth of something. And in fact, what happens is there becomes this sort of like orthodoxy of thought. Regardless, they all become, to one degree or another, an atheist who's an evolutionary, who believes in evolution. They speak the same language. I can see it. You read their books, and I'm like, you're just repeating what, it becomes just derivative. Yeah. And then they did a test, or they had a different angle on something, and they bring it to the fore, right? So
that sounds about right. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's pretty sobering when you start to realize that.
And I think also the institutional pressure for publishing peer review, it definitely just like forces people through a pipeline of some sort of conformity or compliance towards. Yeah. I mean, I think that's like stepping back. I think it's also like very interesting for like the funding of science. If you look at peer review didn't really exist until like the last 40, 50 years.
Really?
You look at, Isaac Newton didn't have anyone peer reviewing calculus.
Yeah, he had calculus. Yeah.
It was just like, I am super smart. I just convinced everyone.
I'm going to invent calculus. How's that sound?
Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, even in Einstein, no one was peer reviewing special relativity, general relativity. Yeah. It was just like, wow, like this is a very good tool to understand, and like proved out in experiments. So I think in some sense I would say that it shortens the variance of outcomes, because, okay, there's something that seems to be working. We're going to fund the things that seem to be working. Mm-hmm. But I think a lot of novelty is doing some crazy shit that seems ridiculous.
Well, so as a computer scientist, do you think we're living in a simulation? Because I feel like with DALL-E, okay, so just engage me or indulge me. When you have this DALL-E and you have ChatGPT, we are approximating through virtual reality and all these things, and synthetic biology and CRISPR-Cas9, and the ability maybe to control our own evolution and create new life forms by mixing genes together. And essentially the only thing stopping us is our imagination, okay? And you start to see this being replicated on computers. Boston Dynamics has these robots that do more than a human does.
Yep.
Then you think to yourself, they're reverse engineering the brain. Are we smart computers that are just making better computers? Is this simulation already happening? Are we already in a loop that seems to be folding in on itself? God, I'm fucking smart. Where's my camera? There it is.
Yeah, I'm open-minded to it. I mean, I think if you look at some of the quantum mechanic effects, which are essentially probability fields until someone looks at it, that feels like a very efficient way to do computer compute, right? If no one's looking at this molecule, we don't need to compute the actual fixed position, right? So like a lot of these like famous quantum experiments, particles are moving in a wave, but if you observe it, you look at it, it ends up being like specific discrete particles. So that feels like to me like if there was some higher God entity that was programming, hey, we're not going to waste computing power on computing things that nothing is looking at. We're only going to compute like the fixed probability or like the actual position once there's someone looking at it. That seems like a computer algorithm.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I would like to be in a simulation. I think that'd be very cool.
Yeah.
Like I would like to have my prayers be looked at, and maybe it can influence reality around.
Do you pray?
I don't know if I call it prayer.
But you're spiritual. You believe in a higher intelligence.
I've been more open-minded towards manifestation and vocalization. I think that's actually been very much influenced by one of my business partners, Jake Paul, who YouTuber turned boxer, and I think arguably has just done some like crazy, unexpected shit in the combat sports world.
He's got balls. As a combat sports lover, I'm so impressed with that kid. I really am.
So he's literally made me much more open-minded towards spirituality and manifestation, because I'm sure we've met a lot of people. I think in terms of his self-belief, like he writes on his goals, on a post-it, puts it on his bathroom mirror.
But see, it's more than self-belief. When I see that kid, like I box, I love to box, and I know I watched him when he didn't know how to box, and he was as bad as any human being possible, and he'll tell you that himself. You can see it.
Yeah.
He's hitting. He doesn't even know how to turn his body. He's not. There's no like movements or anything. He's just going. He's doing. It's all arms. It's the worst.
Flopping around.
And now you're watching this kid like catching shots, and and he can take punches and boom and throwing and stuff, and you're just like, he learned how to box on such a high level. For me, well, I was one of the few guys that would get in the ring and spar. Now, before anybody thinks I'm saying I'm tough, let me explain what I mean. I would move around with pros. I didn't spar pros or really good guys. They would move around with me. So any actor who tells you they sparred a pro is a liar, okay? Because I would get in the ring. My coach was Wayne McCulloch, who was world champion, silver medalist in the Olympic, Hall of Fame boxer. And he would put me in there, and what you do is you move around, and sometimes if you're boxing somebody who's your level or maybe a little, you're gonna get cracked, you're gonna get hit.
Yep.
You get a little nervous. But sometimes I'd move around with Wayne, and he's 5'7", and I'd be hitting him, and then he'd get a little serious. And turn my head all the way around. So when you're boxing, you can't play boxing. And so anytime I got into the ring with anybody who was even remotely a good boxer, I would say, hey, I may look like I can hit mitts, but I'm not. I'm going to make mistakes. And I'm also an old man. So just know that I know I'm not tough. I'd have to say that with anybody who did it for a living.
Yeah.
Jake, this dude, I'm telling you, I can tell you what it takes to get that good. He's getting in the ring with real dudes, getting hit in real time and banging. They're cracking. So he's putting his health at risk, his head at risk, and to be that good in that short a period of time. It's one thing to box Ben Askren, who is not a boxer and a wrestler. It's another thing to get in there with Anderson Silva, who beat Julio Cesar Chavez Jr., who's a legit world champion boxer.
Yep.
Like, so it's actually kind of astonishing. But I think it comes from his work ethic. I think it's because he has the balls to actually not just, work that hard, but actually put it to the test on a daily basis.
Yeah. No, I think you got it spot on. You should come down to Puerto Rico and like look at and just join the camp. I'd
love to join the camp. I want to move around.
No, but I think people just underestimate how much, not just like the work ethic, but like the resources and infrastructure that he has set up for boxing.
God.
Right? Like, think of someone who makes millions of dollars through YouTube and literally putting all that resources into himself as a professional athlete. Right?
I've always loved him and his brother. I don't know. I've only met Logan once, but you cannot deny how hard those kids work.
Yeah.
And I'm saying kids. I think of them as kids because I'm so much older, but they are kids to me, but they're men. But you cannot deny that kind of work ethic. They come from that Ohio. I think they come from a tight family. Those Ohio people, they're farm stock, man. That's farm discipline. That shit is like mid America, and that they hail from a long line of. If you look at them, probably people who had to work the fields. And when you're getting ready for the winter, there's no bullshit. You're waking up at 4 a.m. and you're working. I know my buddy Kevin McNamara worked with Logan. And he said even as a kid, that kid was 18 years old. He was always in his room editing. He was working all day long.
Yep.
He never stopped working, and it's obviously the same thing with Jake.
Yeah.
So I don't know, man. It's pretty wild. So you guys are partners, you and Jake.
Yeah. No, we.
How did you guys become partners?
It was part of like the Magic Miami era during COVID, where it felt like the entire world was shut down. Especially where I originated from in San Francisco.
Except Miami, because they were salsa dancing in the middle of the COVID pandemic.
No, it was straight up.
No masks. Woohoo!
No,
I loved it. I was there. I was like, what the fuck? I was dancing. I salsa danced with my wife, my girlfriend at the time, but in Miami with a bunch of people in the middle of the pandemic. They were like, fuck this, man. Salsa keeps, Cubans don't fuck around. I love them.
No, it feels like a very similar experience. I was sitting in like depressed San Francisco. My friend was renting a place in South Beach, have an extra bedroom. I'll like show up, and then people were in like cocktail dresses, dressed up, and like they're going out. I'm like, holy, Like in San Francisco, like you walk out without a mask, people will start yelling at you.
Oh, I know.
And it just
and everybody in Miami's dead. It's so sad.
And I was like, wait, am I gonna die? Like, what's going on?
I did that joke last time I was performing in Florida. By the way, I'll be on Dania Beach, this Dania Improv this weekend, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. But dude, I did that joke in Florida. I was like telling a story about how I got an Uber and the guy was wearing a mask, and I go, sorry, the guy was wearing a mask. We're in Florida. There was a pandemic, and they all fucking went crazy. Yeah. They were just like, because they just didn't give a shit. I think they wore masks for 1 week, and they were like, get the fuck out of here.
I mean, look, I think the data just shows that method essentially proved out. If you look at excess mortality,
yes,
it's just like,
it's embarrassing. It's embarrassing to see the actual
really,
data coming out now.
Yeah, nothing was really impacted by any intervention. It's just
yes.
like people
yes.
had to burn through, and which is unfortunate. I think people that were going to die just seem to have died earlier. Yeah. It's not. I mean, people dying is always sad.
Yeah.
But I think that's one thing I've actually been thinking about. What if we didn't do any vaccine mandate, no masks, but also no PPP, no stimmy checks? Would we be in this current situation where the economy is in a weird state?
I would say some people would be a lot less rich, and I would say other people would have their businesses still. And I am sympathetic to any public health apparatus that has a pandemic on their hands, doesn't know what they're dealing with, and has to do something. I'm sympathetic to politicians who are responsible for their constituents, and especially if some of them are dying, or a lot of them who are older are dying. So I don't like doing this armchair quarterback thing. I don't know enough. I'm not a scientist. I do think it's significant and important, at least, though, to air out how we handled this pandemic, whether or not this was an overreaction. If you look at the mainstream media and you look at something like CNN, I think they behaved irresponsibly in that they had a ticker that was showing all the mortalities. Now, you start to do some forensic analysis on that. Again, I'm an actor, so I'm not a forensic analyst, but let me just go through this. When hospitals are paid by the government to report it as a COVID death, when you died of something else but you had COVID, okay? And then you get a bonus for a COVID death. And that is a fact. And I think it's there's a reporter who Berenson, or what's his name? He was on Rogan.
Yep.
These are facts that are they're astonishing. Now, do I think there was some conspiracy? No. Do I think that this is classic government bureaucracy and a ripple effect nobody planned on? Yes. But we have to be honest about these things. And in fact, if you watched, if you were, say, a Democrat and you watched the news that confirmed your bias, and if you're a Republican, you watch the news that confirms your bias, and that would probably be Fox or something. The people that watched, the Democrats that watched the mainstream media that confirmed their bias, believed that you had a 40% chance of being hospitalized if you caught COVID. So is it any wonder that people who tend to lean left because their personality probably pushes them in that direction, is it any wonder that they were very conscientious and that they believed wearing a mask was how you saved lives? And they got really mad at people who didn't. I understand. I do. Brett Weinstein, Eric's brother, and yep. Joe Rogan had a great podcast about this. And Brett's an evolutionary biologist who's looked at all the data and interviewed a lot of virologists and immunologists and vaccinologists, or if there's such a word. And man, it's I hope we're learning our lesson. I hope we're not politicizing this thing, because it was politicized. Yeah. So that was my rant. Thank you.
No,
you didn't write any of that down, Jeff.
No, but I think the core point around, like, I think the famous saying, "Show me the incentives, and I'll show you the outcome."
Exactly.
And just like,
did you ever hear the story about the cobras in India? So, yeah, you know the story?
No, I don't.
Oh, so in India, people were, so when the British were there, and they'd have their big, compound, their house, and some of their children got bit by cobras and died. Disaster, right? And so they decided that they were going to eradicate India of its cobra problem. And they basically started paying Indians, the local population, to bring them cobras. Let's just get all these people to kill cobras. They know where they are, and they've been living with them for millennia. Let's get them to kill cobras and take care of the cobras. Well, they would pay them $5, whatever it was, a cobra. The British magistrate or whatever, or the crown. Well, the problem was that all of a sudden cobras brought money. So guess what? They started breeding cobras, thousands of them. And now cobras were everywhere. So you better be careful on what you incentivize,
No, but yeah, exactly. But like going back to, I ended up in Miami and.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, we totally.
No, I mean, like how did but I think it's, I don't know. It's
that was a Bilbo Baggins kind of thing. Okay.
No, I think it's the best conversations, right?
Yeah. So Miami, so you're there, pandemic.
It was really cool to just realize that like all my Silicon Valley friends, all my New York Wall Street friends, and then a very interesting mix of celebrities, athletes, all were like in Miami at the same time where the rest of the world was shut down. I thought I was going to just like move to Montana, get a ranch and just like fish and like hunt and like live out my like wilderness man fantasies.
Dude, you and I are so alike.
I thought I could just like be in my compound and just like program and like make money off the internet and just like be in my like compound.
My buddy Andy Stump was a SEAL Team 6 guy and just a badass, and he's doing that. He's in Montana and just Kalispell, this great house, just fucking hunts his own food with a bow and arrow. Of course, I'm not a Navy SEAL. I get cold really easily. Geoff Woo, that was awesome, man.
Hey, no.
Thank you, bro.
Bryan Callen, this is his intro.